Hi guys, Alex from Mason Lifestyle. I hope this week is going well. Again, with another sew along for a top. Remember a couple of weeks ago on my pattern review, I said I needed more tops. So I am putting together a couple of sew alongs. So today's sew along is for pattern 6684 from Butterick, and I am making view A with the sleeves of C. So let's get started. Hi guys, I am working on Butterick 6684 today. I am doing a Franken pattern of view A with the sleeves of C, so I've had to make some pattern modifications, but let me tell you about the pieces that I'm using. I am using pattern piece number 7, and this is the front, and I have to cut one on the fold, but I don't know if you can see my markings here. I went ahead and did a V-neck and put in my notches in my markings. And then I am using pattern piece number 8, and I cut one on the fold. I'm also going to need a pattern piece number 5, and this is the back neck facing. I have to cut one on the fold and one of interfacing on the fold. Also going to need that V-neck front facing, and this is pattern piece number 4, and I'm going to cut the center on the fold and also an interfacing one on the fold. I also have the color, and I have to cut 2, and this will be cut on the bias. And then I've also cut my sleeves, and that's pattern piece number 11, and I have to cut 2. So go ahead and cut your pattern, mark your notches, and interface the facings. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so I have piece number 1, and I went ahead and did my dart. So go ahead and grab your pins, pin your dart. And when you are stitching your dart, make sure that you are stitching from the outside in and do not backstitch at the end of your dart. Just leave those threads long and tie them. So go ahead and do both of your darts and then press them down. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so we went ahead and stitched our darts and we pressed them down. So now the pattern asks you to grab the back, and with right sides together, go ahead and pin. And as always, mark your notches. Start there. So go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. And while you are there, I also want you to go ahead and finish your seam allowances, meaning press them, and you can finish in your serger, or you can also do a zigzag stitch. And lastly, I want you to stay stitch 1/2 inch away from the raw edge around the back and front of your neckline. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so we went ahead and stitched in our front to our back, and then I also stay stitched around my neckline. So I am going to put that off to the side, and I am going to grab piece number 3, and this is the collar. So now with right sides together, go ahead and mark your notches. And remember, this piece is cut on the bias, so try your best not to stretch this when you are stitching away. So go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end, and go ahead and press your seams open. Go ahead and do that now. So I stitched my 2 pieces number 3 together, and I trimmed and opened those seams. So now I'm going to go ahead and stitch this piece, and I'm going to leave some openings. So we have these dots right there. I am going to stitch, but I'm going to leave an opening because I have to turn this over. All right, so I went ahead and pinned my piece number 3 on both sides, and I am going to stitch from the large circle, not the triangle. That is your shoulder seam. You want to stitch from the large circle 5/8 of an inch. So don't forget the back stitch there, all the way down, and at the end back stitch, and then start again on that large circle and stitch all the way to the other side, pivot, and end at this corner. So go ahead and do that now. Once you do that, we're going to turn this over. So I went ahead and stitched all the way on both sides. So now we want to trim, and you want to stop trimming at the large circles, which is where you stitch to. So grab your scissors or your rolling cutter, and you are going to trim, right? And you definitely want to trim these corners because we are going to be turning this over, so we don't want any bunch of fabric when we turn it on that corner. So go ahead and trim. Now stop at that large circle. So you want to go ahead and trim pieces number 3 that you just stitched on both sides. So now you got this side, my large circle. Again, go ahead and trim all the way to the end. So go ahead and do that now. All right, guys, so we went ahead and turned over our collar piece, and I pressed it. So now I'm going to grab my bodice, and I marked the center back. So I'm going to pin this right here, and then I'm going to make sure that this first triangle or dot is right by my shoulder seam. Then I'm going to make sure that my other dot is right there. And again, dot by that center seam. Not the center seam, but my center seam for my shoulder seam. And then again, this will end right there. So now I want you to stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance, and I want you to baste. I don't want you to stitch it all the way. I want you to baste because we still have the front and back facing to do. So go ahead and baste this in. All right, guys, so I went ahead and basted my collar in, and now I'm going to go ahead and stitch my sides before I do my my facings. So go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end, and do that for both sides. Go ahead and do that now. All right, guys, so I went ahead and stitched my side seams. I still have to finish those, probably in my serger, but I want you to go ahead and try your bodice on. So if you need to take it in a little more, now's your chance. If you need to take it a little bit out, now's your chance. So I'm going to put this off to the side, and I am going to grab my facings, the front and back facing. So again, with right sides together, find the notches. And I want you to stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. And then I also wanted you to finish your outside edge. And of course, don't forget to press those seams open. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so I got my facings done. I'm going to show them to you. So I went ahead and stitched. I trimmed my seams. I also finished my seams. I pressed them open, and then I finish my outer edge. Now, I'm going to grab my bodice, and I am going to go ahead and start by doing these seams at the shoulders. You're going to do this on the outside of your bodice. So in other words, with right sides together. And then I have my middle. Right? My middle. Then I'm going to keep going down, and I am sewing, stitching, pinning by that collar piece, right? So again, one right there. I have a notch right there. All right, guys, so I got my facing all pinned in, and I want you to stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance, and I want you to start at the back middle, right? Back stitch, go all the way around, stopped right at that dot in the front center, and then again start in the center and go the other way, and again and at the center. Don't forget the back stitch at the start, at the end. Go slow, because remember, you also have the collar that you are pinning that facing on top. So you want to make sure that you are stitching and grabbing all of that collar in. So go slow. Go ahead and do that now. All right, guys, so I stitched in my facing and now I'm going to cut, right? So I'm going to cut, and I also want you to understitch. So again, understitch means that you are stitching the facing to the seam allowance as close as possible to that seam, because when we turn this in, we want to make sure that the facing is staying inside and not outside. And then once you do that, I want you to also trim all of this fabric, because you have a lot of fabric from the collar back here. So we want to make sure that you also do that, and that you clip in any round areas. So what I mean by that is, right, clip any like curves, and that you clip any curves. And then that you go ahead and that you turn in your facing. So again, clip to that circle, right? I want you to understitch, and then don't forget to clip all of these round areas. So we want to make sure that the facing is laying flat, and that you also trim all of this fabric back here. I have almost like 4 or 5 layers of fabric between the facing, the collar, the bodice. So I don't want any of that bulk. So I'm going to trim all of that. So go ahead and do that now. Okay guys, so what do I mean by understitching? It means that I am going to stitch as close as possible to that seam that I just did, and I'm going to make sure that my seam allowances are towards the facing. Again, I want to make sure that my seam allowances are towards the facing, because I want to make sure that when I turn this over, that my facing is staying inside and not outside. So I'm going to stitch. And again, I am stitching as close as possible to the facing seam, to this seam, but I'm staying on the right side. So that's understitching. Go ahead and do that all around the facing. So we went ahead and did our understitching, and it's that right there, that little line of stitches, just so our facing stays in the inside. And I'm going to put a couple of tack stitches attaching my seam allowance to the facing, just so again stays inside. So I'm going to put this off to the side, and I'm going to grab my sleeves, and I want you to do 2 rows of basting stitches with your longest running stitch, and I want you to leave your threads long, because we are going to ease in our sleeves. So go ahead and do 2 rows of basting stitches from dot to dot, and once you do that, I want you to, with right sides together, mark your notches, and then I want you to stitch in your sleeves. So again, 5/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. So then do that for both of your sleeves. Again, I want you to do 2 rows of basting stitches. Do not back stitch. Once you're done with that, I want you to go ahead with right sides together, mark your notches, 1 row, and stitch your sleeve. Go ahead and do that now for both stitches. All right guys, so I already did 1 row of basting stitches, and I'm going to do another row. And again, I'm going to leave my threads long. there's my 2 rows. So, all right, so I stitched in my sleeves, right? And then I also did those 2 rows of gathering stitches and I press my seam. Super important because if you don't do this, it's not going to line up here. You may have like a little bubble and it's not going to line up. So press your seams. You know how all this sewing stuff is. You do a seam, you press that seam. You do another seam, you press. It's you become one with the iron. So you got your sleeve. So again, right sides together. So I'm going to pop in my sleeve, and then first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to match that seam, that underarm seam pin, right? And then I'm going to check that my notches are correct. So 1 notch, that means the front, and then 2 notches, that means the back. If something's not matching there, make sure it does. You may have stitched in the sleeve on the wrong side. That's usually why I have washi tape just telling me which way to go. Now, next thing I want you to do, I want you to match that dot. So you have 1, 2, and 3 dots. That middle dot, that is your shoulder seam. So you definitely want to put that there. And I pull on some of my threads, but let me show you. So I have the dot here, but the dot on the other side is all the way there, almost an inch away. So I have to make sure I match those dots. So I have to release some of these gathering stitches so I can get over there. So let's see. That's close, but still I have a little bit more to go. Let's see. That's close. All right, let's see. Still, I have to release that a little more. And now that's pretty good. Okay, other side, same thing. You see a dot on this side and my dot over there. That means I have to release some of these gathers. And if you go over, just pull on the threads again. Right? So dot over this side, dot on this side. All right, so so now that you have this all stitched in, I want you to stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. Go ahead and do that for both sleeves. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch my sleeve, and I have the sleeve towards the machine because I want the feed dogs to go ahead and help me. So back stitch, and again trying to make sure that there's no puckers, nothing. So we got our sleeves set in, and again, I went ahead and pressed them, and seams match, no puckers. And if you have a pucker, just go back there and perhaps unstitch a small area. Ease it in again and stitch it again. You don't have to take out the entire sleeve. Just take out a small little section and go ahead and fix it and go back again. So once that's done, they ask you to go ahead and do a narrow hem on your sleeve, 5/8, and stitch, and then also the hem at the bottom. So turn, of course, and stitch, and that's it. That is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the solo. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that sew along. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. As always, please go ahead and ring the bell and give it a thumbs up. See you next time. Bye.